Do you have a pattern of feeling guilty when people around you aren't happy, even though you shouldn't feel that way? Or maybe put your needs well behind those of others consistently. Perhaps you modify your behavior a bit too much out of fear for how other people are going to react or feel. Or just worry too much about the well-being of others and the choices of those that you care about. If this sounds a bit like you or someone you care about, in this video I'm going to dive into the challenges with taking excessive responsibility for the emotions and behaviours of others. I call it taking ownership for other people's stuff. And it's super common. I've seen it over and over again in the past 20 plus years in my career, but I've also seen it play out in myself. And I've had to do that inner work to soften this pattern, fortunately with some success. So I'm not just qualified professionally, but also personally in what I have to share today. I also wanted to start by explaining a bit how I approach this video and other videos to come. In the first section, I'm drawing on my professional experiences from my work as a clinical psychologist in my 22-year career. I've been fortunate enough to work with a significant number of clients in that time, and also have had the benefit of training in a whole range of different modalities that have all served me in different ways and served my clients in different ways. In the second section, I'm going to be exploring the metaphysical, spiritual and bigger picture perspectives on this topic, and also future topics I will cover. Now, the split won't necessarily be 50-50 each video, but I'll endeavour to cover both. Some of you might be flinching when I use a word like spiritual and decide that that sounds a bit too woo-woo or unscientific, and I'm not really here to try and convince you otherwise. If it doesn't resonate with you, then maybe I'm not your guy. But I will say that quantum physics is the cutting edge science. It is the science that is bridging science and spirituality. And if you really do your own research and look into what's out there, a good place to start would be the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where there is considerable data available, where there are papers that have been published that really give compelling evidence to the concept that consciousness is the primary basis for all physical and non-physical reality, and that this world or this existence we're living most definitely goes beyond the physical, and matter is not the primary basis for our existence. So what am I referring to when I reference taking responsibility for everyone else's stuff? There are those stereotypical cases where one might think of a battered woman who blames herself for angering her violent husband. I'm not really referring to that sort of example here. I think in this day and age we're getting much better at realising that abusive behaviour from another human being is not our fault. There's no excuse for it. But it is a bit more common that we take responsibility for the subtle things, that we subconsciously and automatically default to people-pleasing or self-sacrificing. over empathizing, or feeling guilty when someone isn't happy, someone we care about in particular. And many of us don't even realize we're doing it until we step back and have a look at ourselves. I was certainly one of those. I didn't realize until a few years back that that was me, that I was taking too much responsibility for other people's stuff. So I've given you a few examples, but just to continue on with those examples, spending a lot of time worrying about your loved ones can be a sense of taking too much responsibility, feeling guilty anytime you say no to a request from someone, not creating the time for your own self-care, feeling resentful when you stop and think about how much you give to others and how little you receive in return. There's also this maybe pattern of backing down every time you try to assert yourself, feeling that if someone else gets an emotional reaction, then that's your fault. And also just feeling like when you need someone to be there for you, that they're not there. You're always there for others, but they're not really there for you. My example is around guilt, that I detected a pattern in myself where I felt guilty anytime someone around me was upset, even though I knew that was illogical, that it wasn't my stuff, but I just defaulted to feeling that way anyway. And so if you're resonating with these examples, either in you or someone you care about, the question comes up, why? Not only why, but why is it so hard to change these patterns once we realize that we've got them unfolding? And the short answer is it's due to unconscious core belief patterns, generally that formed in the early stages of life. It's our programming that was created to keep us emotionally safe. I'm not going to go into the details of how those beliefs are formed in this particular video, but there will be another video that dives into the formation of these unconscious beliefs. What I will say here, though, is that these parts of our personality were needed, as I mentioned a moment ago. They were needed to keep us emotionally safe or have our emotional needs met within the unit we were raised in. Generally, that's our family. Generally, that is to keep our parents either pleased or peaceful in some kind of way. So one example would be, let's say a child did not, or you as a child did not feel like you got the love that you were hoping for. It doesn't mean that you weren't loved, but you didn't experience it the way you would like to. Then becoming a people pleaser as a way to get the love to come to you is one way that this programming unfolds. It could also unfold from just seeing another parent doing people pleasing as well, but either your unmet needs or the modeling are two ways. Some will just say it's genetics. I would argue it's more than that, and that these experiences need to come forward to activate certain genes. And that's what the field of epigenetics is showing us as well, if you want to dive down that rabbit hole. So in this video, I want to cover how we can manage this with conscious strategies and how we can also work with it at a deeper subconscious level. So from a conscious mind perspective, it can start with simply being mindful. Awareness is a great starting point. For example, preparing yourself for high-risk situations where you might slip into people-pleasing or passively not standing up for yourself and enforcing boundaries is a great place to start. Maybe mentally rehearsing how you will respond differently than the way you habitually respond can be helpful. But I should point out that it can be quite challenging in that when you try and consciously override these patterns, there is likely to be uncomfortable feelings and sensations that come up in the body often. Real resistance, because your unconscious mind doesn't feel like it's safe to engage in these new behaviors and feels like it's a threat to go to this new way of doing things. even though you consciously know that there's no threat and it's safe to change and, step into this new version of yourself, these learnt patterns early on are more powerful. The unconscious mind, subconscious, is more powerful. It'll do what it needs to do to keep us safe if it thinks we're under threat, even if it's illogical. So if this happens and we get lots of strong sensations, then making space for these sensations, making space for these feelings, is important. Not to resist them, not to fight against these waves of emotion that will come through us as we try and change a pattern. And they could keep coming even after we've enforced the boundary. So you may have asserted yourself and then later on you're replaying it and feeling that surge of guilt or anxiety run through you later on too. I like the Chinese finger trap as a way of reminding people how to step into more of an accepting attitude. With the finger trap, if you pull or resist, it makes it worse. When you push in or go with it, go with the flow, which is like the experience of acceptance, accepting that I'm in this trap, going with it, not resisting, then things don't get as problematic as pulling and resisting, which is what we need to do with our emotions when they surge through us. Another model to bring to bear in this situation is this ABC model. Now, in this model, it's helpful to look at how things unfold so that potentially you don't take on as much responsibility as you typically would when you step back and look at it in a more logical way, I guess. So A standing for antecedent or a triggering situation, B being belief, and then C, the consequence. For example, let's say you assert yourself with someone in your life. You stand up for yourself, and what happens next is the consequence being that this person becomes upset, and you go into that old pattern of blaming yourself because you think, oh, well, if I hadn't have said anything, they wouldn't be upset, so it's my fault that they're unhappy. But what about it B? The belief that the person had about what you've said. It's their perception of what you said at A that is really crucial, particularly if what you've said at A is appropriate and respectful. So if the person thinks, I can't believe you said that, that's so rude, in reference to you just being assertive, and you know that assertive, well, my definition of assertive is respecting self and others equally, and you've done that, you respected yourself and the other person equally, then they've made themselves upset by the way they've chose to look at that situation. Obviously, if you've been aggressive at A and not respectful, then you taking some responsibility for that person's reaction is appropriate. But if that's not the case and you sense that you've just been assertive and respectful, and you're pretty confident that that's what you've done at A, they are responsible for their response, for their upset emotions. And they could easily, for example, generate a different belief at B. Something like, well, that's fair enough for that other person to speak up about their feelings. And if that were to happen, the consequence at C would be quite different, a more neutral, less emotive outcome. But when there are situations where this clearly doesn't happen and the other person doesn't get to that kind of alternate or preferred way of looking at it, we're back to acceptance again. Accepting that we can do nothing. We can't control our waves of emotions coming through us, and we also can't control another person's emotions or perception either. Less so, to be honest. Definitely cannot control another person. And just to be able to know that we've done what we could to have a respectful interaction and step away. And so now I'd like to look at working with these issues at a deeper subconscious level. As I've already mentioned, unconscious and subconscious beliefs are running in the background on autopilot all the time. They are our default for how we respond or react often to situations. And the good news is that we can actually work with this stuff sitting underneath the surface, these emotions and these parts of us that are holding certain beliefs, by going into an alpha brainwave state. And so to give you an example, what alpha brainwave state, we go into that when we're daydreaming. So if you just start thinking about what you did last weekend or off into the future or some other imaginary world, that's going into more alpha brainwave patterning than the beta one that presumably you're closer to focusing on this video. Watching a movie is another great example, getting swept off into some kind of fictitious world and suspending disbelief, which involves just going with the flow of where that fictitious world takes you, is another example of going into an alpha brainwave state. And so bringing that kind of inner focus and going into that alpha brainwave state in a guided meditative type of a way, we can work with this stuff going on inside, the stuff that might be referred to as our inner child parts or our shadow parts, sometimes you may hear it referred to as. And yeah, it's all just there. It's not as hard to access it. You don't have to go into a deep hypnotic trance. You don't have to completely be delving into some Pandora's box that's hidden deeply. It's there to access. And I prefer to use the internal family systems model, a model created by Richard Schwartz, as my way of working on it personally and with my clients. I just think the model it's so powerful. It brings a lot of respect and compassion to our inner workings, and I've just seen amazing outcomes with this sort of work on myself and with those I help. If you've got no experience with this sort of inner work, I would encourage you look to getting some kind of IFS practitioner or practitioner to guide you through it. But if you've got a bit of experience doing the inner work, then certainly you can look at some YouTube videos on IFS, or Richard Schwartz has got a great book called No Bad Parts that it could be enough for you to dive in and do this work on yourself. And now I want to go to another level. I mentioned that I wanted to tap into a more esoteric or metaphysical way of looking at things here. And one aspect of that is to consider this concept of energy, and that people are, that we as human beings, some of us can be very empathic or highly sensitive to the energies of what's going on around us. And whilst an empath or having empathy is seen as a positive trait in a lot of ways, some of us feel cursed that we can't sort of switch off those feelings or can't dial down that intensity with which we feel the emotions of others and just the world around us in general. Everything is made of energy. Quantum physics has shown us that now. Our bodies are, and physical matter is energy holding a certain vibrational frequency. Our thoughts and our feelings are frequencies, invisible, yes, but frequencies that can be measured and have been measured. All energy is projecting out into this unified quantum field. But even if you're not sure about that concept of the unified field, just the idea that we can pick up on the local energetic field around us is a commonplace experience for many people. Just going into an environment where you feel the vibe of someone that you haven't even engaged with yet, or have someone standing in close proximity and feel uncomfortable because they're in your field of energy, is a commonplace experience for us. And so what sensitive people do is they try to appease people around so that they're calm and that you don't have to pick up on that energy anymore. You don't have to absorb it. But that's only a short-term fix, and there's a downside to it, because you then sacrifice your own emotions, shove them down, stuff them down, only for them to want to come out later. So maybe a better way to do it, I would suggest, is to find a way to not have to sacrifice yourself, but to dial down that empathy, because over empathy is a real thing. There's such thing as having that dial up too high. And I've been fortunate enough to have experienced a way to dial that down in my training with the Institute of Quantum Consciousness. During one of the expanded consciousness experiences that I was led through, we refer to it as the empath journey, I was offered 3 gifts that many of us can benefit from. The first was to observe but not absorb. Being able to be in the vicinity of the emotions of others or the general environment and not take it on or in. Secondly, it was to know what is mine and what is someone else's, where I stop and where the other's responsibility for themselves kicks in. And thirdly, energetic discernment, which is the capacity to choose wisely as to what energies and environments to place yourself around so that one doesn't overwhelm themselves unnecessarily. And what I noticed after having this experience is that guilt that I mentioned earlier, it almost disappeared. So when someone that I was close to, say my child, was upset at me, and I'd known that there was nothing that I'd actually done there to really be the cause of that upset, that I'd acted appropriately and with integrity and love, I was just able to not take it on board, not feel like it was mine to own. And it's something that's continued. And I'm very fortunate to have had that experience and for it to stay with me still. And if it sounds appealing to you, that kind of an outcome, then I'll provide the link to the Institute of Quantum Consciousness below, and I also offer these journeys personally as well. Another high-level perspective to take on the theme of this video relates to soul contracts and soul plans. Now, if you're not familiar with this concept, I suggest you look at the work of Michael Newton, a psychologist who's written books such as Journey of Souls and Life Between Lives. And in Michael's work, he took thousands of people through hypnotic regression, him and his colleagues, and found that there was this repeatable experience in between lifetimes where an individual could experience that their soul chose certain key challenges and themes before incarnating in each lifetime. So at some higher soul level, we choose challenges, we choose these themes and challenges to go through. Not at a conscious level. We don't consciously decide to put ourselves through discomfort and certainly not trauma, but from a higher perspective, there is a gift there waiting when you can move through fear and victimhood and step into the remembrance of who you really are, of who we all really are, which is love. Unconditional love is what we are at our core essence, and we can't actually, we choose to experience that through having the opposite, through having this struggle of having the opposite of love as a contrast to find our way back and needing that resistance to find our way back. Just like a butterfly needs the resistance of the cocoon to push against in order to break free and fly. Without that resistance, it won't fly. It needs that struggle. And we, as hard as it might be to wrap your head around and believe, need that struggle, chose that struggle as far as being human goes. that darkness that we experience is an opportunity to find your way back to the light. And we are not cursed or a victim of bad luck. It's all an opportunity to find your way back to love. I'm not advocating for toxic behavior from others. I'm simply sharing what I've come to understand is unfolding at a high perspective from my explorations over the years. And so what do we do with this, the fact that we've got these shadowy aspects of ourselves that have been hurt and, even traumatized from the way we've been over many years? It's to do that inner work, to do that shadow work that I mentioned earlier, and to turn inwards and bring love and compassion to these parts of ourselves that are overly protective or wounded, and not bring force or try and use logic as a way to fix them, to bring compassion and to bring loving attention to them in a way where these parts basically modify themselves or shift themselves just with that kind of an approach. I urge you to see that the challenge you have with taking excessive responsibility for others or not loving yourself enough is not by accident. There's a purpose and an opportunity behind these challenges. You're not meant to be a victim to life. I'm not denying that we all, or many of us, will have experiences that are victimizing through circumstances or through certain people. That's not the question here. But we do have the power to choose how we give meaning to those experiences and how we can use them to evolve. Some people like to use the phrase, turn your pain into purpose. And we often can't see that bigger picture when we are right in the middle of these experiences, and we are going to have our reactive human experiences. It's unlikely that we're going to be able to really have the perspective when a real crisis is unfolding. But once we can find our way to a more neutral and curious awareness and shine that on these experiences, we can gain the full learning and the spiritual growth from this pain and discomfort that we experience. We're not meant to suffer. And certainly self-sacrificing at the cost of your own well-being is not love. You can be of service to others without abandoning yourself. You deserve to love yourself as much as you love others. So choose to be love in all of its facets. Love to others and self. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again in future videos.